Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is, and welcome. I'm Larry Erickson. This is the Erickson Report. Okay, so that happened. The oddest thing about the inauguration is that if you manage to ignore the 20,000 plus National Guard troops in the Capitol, plus turning the immediate vicinity into a green zone nearly worthy of Baghdad, which admittedly, watching it, you couldn't really see either of those. So if you just squinted a little bit, then it looked kind of normal, which was probably the best thing about it. That what happened was that nothing happened. Now, I have to say that I actually was not surprised at the lack of attempted violence. I know others were very concerned about it. My best friend, in fact, told me that she spent the entire week preceding it in a state of extreme anxiety about it. But I was concerned, of course, but I was not overly worried about it for much the same reason that I was not surprised at the lack of violence at the weekend before the inauguration, despite some predictions of, violent demonstrations at all 50 state capitals. Here's why. The mob that stormed the Capitol building on January 6th was full of arrogance and bravado, and no doubt would have been a much greater threat to do violence on Inauguration Day, but for two factors that were not present during the riot. Factors which in fact are good ways of heading off that kind of behavior by that kind of yahoo. One is to make clear you're prepared for them, which clearly is what the security and the National Guard was all about. Now it was likely, particularly in the number of troops, kind of over the top, but I expected that was intended, that the presence of the troops was intended to do more than just provide security. It was intended as a warning for the future, a way of saying, look what we can marshal against you on short notice. Which relates to the other thing, and why I think the weekend rallies were so few and, in comparison to other similar events, relatively quiet. The hundreds of arrests that were made during the week following the riot. Because it presented something I think a good number of those people who stormed the Capitol never considered at the time: the possibility of consequences. Tough talk and bravado have been known to melt in the face of the reality of potential consequences, which just proves once again, despite all their attempts at swagger and mockery, it's the right wing that are the real snowflakes. Now, none of this means, and I want to emphasize this, and as I've said several times before, none of this means that this is over now. None of this means that the danger of violence or even of more attempts at insurrection is past. None of this means that our political structure, a democracy which is clearly flawed but at least functions, none of this means that that's secure from attempts at violent overthrow. Even less does it mean that we are no longer subject to efforts by the elites to undermine that democracy through their assaults on voting rights, civil liberties, and privacy, but that particular thing is a discussion for another time. What it does mean, though, is that for the moment, that danger has been pushed into the shadows and is more likely to manifest itself in isolated terrorist attacks. Isolated here, meaning with no easily seen pattern of location or time or even type of target, looking instead for opportunities to create disruption and social havoc rather than undertaking a large-scale assault. In other words, it means that we may be facing in our day-to-day lives what millions of people already have been and continue to face in their day-to-day lives in countries around the world. So it's not over, and it won't be over. But that actually makes it more important than ever that we strive to be the best, by which I mean the most just nation that we can. Now, one hopeful sign that came out on Inauguration Day was a number of executive orders reversing Tweetie-pie policies that Bladen signed straight away, right from the get-go, along with announcements that there are apparently going to be a bunch more of them over the following week. Now, I call him Bladen because I could never get excited about his candidacy. I said he needed to come into office claiming a mandate, but I was afraid he would come in saying, we've got to look forward, not backward, and how can we placate the goppers? On his first day, to my pleasant surprise, he acted like a man with a plan. No, so maybe he can prove it to me. I really doubt it. I have significant doubts. But he did get off to a good start on day one. All right, next up, we turn to something that I like to start the show with when I can, is good news. And we start with some truly rare good news about cars and the Fourth Amendment. On December 22nd, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that Pennsylvania police can no longer search cars without a warrant unless there is both probable cause to believe that a crime has occurred and emergency circumstances requiring immediate action. That reverses a decision from just 5 years ago from the same court that cleared the way for warrantless searches based on nothing more than a claimed belief that contraband is present. A little over a year before this new decision, an analysis by the Philadelphia Inquirer found that Philadelphia cops, using the old standard, were performing an average of more than 2,000 warrantless car searches a month. Over 80% of which, I'm sure will come as no surprise, over 80% involve black drivers. Now, before this decision, the excuse was always some cop, the go-to excuse was, I think I smell marijuana, and use that to justify the search. Now, I right now wonder what the new go-to excuse is going to be. But my entirely justified cynicism aside, this is still good news in the light of the fact that courts, both state and federal, have often treated cars as a place where the Fourth Amendment simply does not apply. All right, next. Even in the midst of a resurgence of violent, overt white supremacy, we can still see signs that, yes, over time, things can get better. Just consider, for one, that the state of Georgia, of all places, has just sent a black man and a Jew to the U.S. Senate. Okay, the example I have here actually isn't about racism, it's about homophobia, but still, embrace it for the encouragement it offers that on the effects of time and persistence. On December 23rd, New York's Second Department Supreme Court, which is New York State's equivalent of a federal circuit court of appeals, the court ruled that being accused of being a homosexual can no longer be counted as defamation per se. Per se, expect you know, means in and of itself. What the ruling is saying is that acceptance of LGBTQ folks has reached to the point where saying so-and-so is gay is not itself defamatory. And this is by no means the only court or the only case to say so. You know, at one time, and not so long ago, being described as LGBTQ was thought of as so shameful, such a disgrace, that falsely accusing someone of it was legally the same as accusing them of a heinous crime or having a loathsome disease. It was something so bad that you didn't have to prove any damages as a result. The claim itself was damage. Now the general trend courts have followed is to say that no, the accusation is no longer defamation per se. You can still sue, but you have to show some actual damages, like you lost your job as the result of the accusation. As it's said, the moral arc of the universe may be long, but it does bend toward justice. So don't ever give up the struggle, because things can get better. 2 years ago, next up, Tweetie-pie was frustrated after federal courts blocked his attempt to illegally insert a question about immigration status into the census forms. So in response, he demanded that the Census Bureau prepare a separate report on the number of undocumented immigrants in the United States, intending to use it as the basis for an executive order removing those people from the count for the reapportionment of congressional seats. Something which would be to the benefit of goppers and non-Hispanic whites. Now that order will very likely be illegal too, as the Constitution clearly gives the role of overseeing those matters to Congress. And there have been several suits over the prospect of this order, but the Supreme Court has ruled those are premature. Now, however, that won't matter. On January 13th, Census Bureau Director Stephen Dillingham ordered Bureau staff to, quote, stand down and discontinue their data reviews, putting an end to the attempts by Tweetie-pie thugs to change the rules to their own benefit. Dillingham was facing demands that he resign for buckling to Tweetie-pie's demands in the first place and agreeing to the survey. So maybe at this point he was just saying, to hell with it, he's out in a week, my term is over in 2 weeks, and I've got better things to do with my life than deal with this crap. Or maybe he decided at the last minute to do the right thing. Whatever the reason, the fact is that this effort to turn undocumented immigrants again into constitutional non-persons has failed again. Next up, on January 15th, the NRA announced that it is leaving New York, where it has been incorporated since its founding in 1871, and heading for Texas, where it intends to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. This is an attempt to evade the civil suit filed by New York State Attorney General Letitia James, charging large-scale financial corruption and looking to dissolve the group. James' response to the announcement was to say that the NRA's claimed financial status has finally met its moral status, bankrupt, adding that we will not allow the NRA to evade accountability in my office's oversight. To which I say, you go, girl. All right, a quick one just for the fun of it. On January 17th, Betty White turned 99. The day before, she said she was going to celebrate by having a hot dog and French fries for dinner and then staying up late. Finally, for now, an Obama-era rule, the Clean Power Plan, was about limiting greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. The Tweetie-pie gangsters wanted to replace it with what they called the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, based on their interpretation of the Clean Air Act, under which emission controls would have to be imposed plant by plant, every one of which obviously would be subject to a legal challenge, leading to years and potentially decades of litigation, making the whole project impossible. Well, on January 19th, Tweetie-pie's last full day in office, the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia unanimously threw out the new rule and remanded the matter back to the EPA, which is, of course, now in an administration which says it will prioritize climate change, which I call a nice going away present. And we're going to take our break right now. And we are back. And we are back with one of our regular and one of our most popular features around here. It's called 2 Weeks of Stupid, Clowns and Outrages. And we start, as usual, with the clowns. Following the deadly Capitol raid on January 6th, Twitter announced it was suspending thousands of QAnon-related accounts for using the platform to promote violence. On January 10th, Sarah Huckabee Sanders whined that she had lost 50,000 followers and tweeted a screenshot from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claiming some right-wingers had lost followers while Biden, Harris, Pelosi, and Schumer had gained them, which to her was proof that right-wingers are being censored by the radical left tech. This isn't China, she sniveled on about things. Well, AOC observed that Sanders was implicitly acknowledging that her followers were neo-Nazis and violent insurrectionists who were being kicked off the platform. Well, for my part, I wondered why she found it so unfathomable that people connected to an outgoing administration were losing followers while people connected to an incoming administration were gaining them. Either way, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is major clown material. All right, last week, a fanatical evangelical pastor named Robert Henderson angrily deranged, and yes, that is a word I made up, angrily deranged that Joe Biden could not possibly have won the 2020 election legitimately because God would not allow that to happen. You're going to tell me that a man who has been the best friend that Christianity and the kingdom of God has had is going to be removed by God and replaced by a baby-killing socialist? All right, first, leaving aside the fact that Henderson is elevating an inveterate liar and serial adulterer who has, according to Jesus, less chance of getting into heaven than a camel has of getting through the eye of a needle, he's actually arguing that God wanted Blodden to lose, but apparently wasn't capable of doing anything about it. Which puts kind of a weird twist on the evangelical view of God, but apparently not too weird for a clown like Robert Henderson. All right, and now a double-barreled excursion into Paranoia Town. On January 5th, the day before that riotous mob attacked the Capitol, newly elected Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, best known as the Congresswoman from QAnon, appeared on extremist right-wing lie channel Newsmax to decry a fraudulent stolen election and to say the next day's rally would be our 1776 moment. But in the wake of that clownish failure of an attempted insurrection, Greene, like most of her ilk, turned coward and ran away from her own words, going on about she wanted peaceful opposition. Which does make her a good example of pretty much every right-winger out there. But wait, there's more. Back on Newsmax on January 13th, Representative The Color of Nausea said she plans on filing articles of impeachment against President Blodden on his very first day in office because the American people will not tolerate this, while being unable to cite a single actual charge that could be included. Which again makes her a pretty good example of the right wing. By the way, the first week of the House session, she apparently appeared on the House floor wearing a COVID mask with various slogans of the paranoid right wing on them. But you know what? As long as she wears the damn mask, I really don't care. Blather on, bozo. All right, this next one. This one's a little tricky. It lies in the gap between Clown and Outrage, being one that in an even slightly saner time would be laughed at for being so boneheadedly stupid. But now we can't afford to laugh, so consider it a segue from the clowns to the outrages. Terry Jones is a GOPR member of the North Dakota legislature. Under a bill he has introduced, any state form that asks for racial information would be required to list American as the first choice. Why? Because he says he's disgusted with how race is being used by bad actors to divide the country. Bad actors being, I expect, people such as the Black Lives Matter movement and others who point out the racism in U.S. society. Because, you know, geez, if we'd only all call ourselves Americans, all that racism, all that division caused by bad actors would, you know, obviously just disappear. Asked how American can be a race, he answered by defining the word as, quoting, a group of people that has lived under common laws for mutual benefit. How race then differs from nationality apparently went unexplained. He did even worse in asserting his bill would unite the country, claiming not only that people of all backgrounds are proud to be Americans, but Black Americans, quoting, are glad their ancestors were brought here as slaves. And what is the basis this clown has for this? He remembers reading an article in the Reader's Digest 30 or 40 years ago where apparently in this one article there was one black doctor who said something more or less to that effect. And with that kind of, you know, unquestionable evidence, I mean, who could argue? Representative Gretchen Dobrovich, another member of the North Dakota House, said, I don't think the bill is meant to be racist, but the optics are not good. Okay, first off, screw the optics business, but actually, I agree. I don't think it's intended to be racist. I don't think Jones was there thinking, this'll stick it to those, you know, fill in the racial epithet of your choice. But the thing is, that's the point. That's the problem. The kind of routine, unaware, ingrained, unconscious racism endemic to our society that can move someone to dismiss the past and the present pain and damage and suffering wrought by that racism and convince themselves that the problem is not racism but divisions created by bad actors, and so imagine all we need to do is to engage in some greeting card sentimentality. That is the problem. As I said, the desire remains to laugh at this for being so stupid. But the fact is we can no longer afford to, and it's an outrage. All right, this next one also lies in the space between clown and outrage because there is a clownish aspect to it, but this one clearly lies on the outrage side of that gap. Okay, on January 15th, Tweetie-pie received Morocco's highest award for his work in advancing a normalization deal between Morocco and Israel. Now that's the clown part, the idea of Tweetie-pie deserving any kind of award for peace, especially in the Middle East, especially after a sycophantic support of Israel's oppression of the Palestinians. The outrage part is everything else here, centered on the fact that Tweetie-pie secured the deal by making the U.S. the first Western nation to recognize Morocco's illegal seizure of Western Sahara. Western Sahara had been a colony of Spain for over 100 years until Spain withdrew in 1975. I actually own a world atlas from 1969 that shows what it called the Spanish Sahara as a separate country. Well, immediately after the Spanish left, Western Sahara was invaded by Morocco from the north and Mauritania from the south, both seeking control over the natural resources there. Morocco sent not only troops, but hundreds of thousands of civilians to settle in and occupy the area. Mauritania withdrew in a few years, but Morocco is still there 45 years later. The invasion touched off a 16-year war with the Sahrawi Liberation Front, known as the Polisario Front. With U.S. military aid, Morocco drove that resistance to Western Sahara's eastern desert, then created the world's largest, longest minefield and a 1,700-mile-long wall to keep them there. It divided the Sahrawis into those under occupation and those who had fled into exile. In 1991, the UN brokered an end to that 16-year war and promised Sahrawis a referendum on self-determination. For the 29 years since, Morocco has blocked any attempts to organize that vote, and the Security Council has refused to act, even as the Moroccan government continues torture, disappearances, killings, and repression against pro-independence Sahrawis. Human Rights Watch, in its World Report 2021, describes how the Moroccan government in 2020 continued, quote, to systematically prevent gatherings supporting Sahrawi self-determination, obstruct the work of local human rights organizations, and beat activists and journalists in their custody and on the streets. That is what Tweetie-pie has just endorsed as official U.S. policy, and he did it obscenely on December 10th. Which is Human Rights Day. It's an obscene outrage. And parenthetically, this is without even noting how how Morocco, labeled by Freedom House's ranking system as the 7th least free country in the entire world, systematically represses any criticism of the monarchy and subjects women and LGBTQ people to legal bigotry. And that story actually also leads us directly to our next outrage, which is another example of how we are uninformed, malinformed, and misinformed by our major news media. And reporting on that deal and a plan to open a U.S. consulate in Western Sahara, Reuters, ABC News, AP, and Politico all use some variation of the term territorial dispute to describe what's been happening there. Reuters and AP also described the Polisario Front as, respectively, a breakaway movement and an organization pressing for the territory's independence, as if Western Sahara had always been a part of Morocco and they're looking to secede. Get this straight, people. This is not a territorial dispute. This is not a secessionist movement. This is people denied their rights to self-determination, first by the Spanish and then by the Moroccans with the assistance of the U.S. and the passivity of the United Nations, and oppressed people who are resisting an invasion and foreign occupation. You may think that they are foolish. You may think it's pointless to continue and they should just, give up. And just take whatever Morocco will offer them. You may think that, just as the way some people think that about Palestinians and the Israelis. You may think that. But if you do, at the very least, don't buy the bull that you're being offered by the major news media about it, because it's an outrage. Okay, this past week saw the annual federal holiday in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. And there's one thing about it that gets me every year without fail, every year regular as clockwork, every year we are treated to the spectacle of right-wings, reactionaries, and the rest of the bozos and bigots declaring how, oh my gosh, wasn't he so amazing? And oh yes, we really do believe, we share his dream, and oh my yes, we really, really, really do honor his memory. And I am freaking sick to death of it. Sick to death of the transparent, grinning, smug hypocrisy of people who would have been among those who reviled King when he was alive, who would have applauded Bull Connor's fire hoses and dogs, who today reviled, condemn, and tear gas those protesting and continued inequality and police violence, and who think that smartly quoting a line about judging somebody not by the color of their skin but the content of their character once every year covers all of their sins. The FBI tweeted out a picture of a monument at the Reflection Garden at NBC FBI headquarters in Virginia that has a quote from Martin Luther King saying, "The time is always right to do what's right." The FBI, the agency the day after the famous I Have a Dream speech, wanted to, quoting a memo from FBI Domestic Intelligence Chief William Sullivan, wanted to mark MLK as the most dangerous Negro of the future in this nation and use every resource at our disposal to destroy him. The FBI, the agency that harassed him, spied on him, wiretapped him, the agency that have obtained proof of his having affairs, anonymously sent him an audio tape with a letter calling him a filthy, abnormal animal, trying to blackmail him into committing suicide. The FBI, the agency whose director, J. Edgar Hoover, feared the rise of what he called the Black Messiah, and which for years strove to undermine and discredit black activists of all types, that FBI now has the gall to claim to be inspired by King's words. And they're hardly alone. This year we got, among others, Kayleigh McEnany, RNC Chair Ronna Romney McDaniel, Melania Trump, former Vice President Mike Not Worth a Farthing, former Senate Majority Leader Fishface McConnell, Lindsey Graham Cracker, and Ted Ooze, all proclaiming what its inspiration King was to them. More than that, there is and has been a damn industry among the right to twist the words and message of Martin Luther King into the service of racism, classism, elitism, right-wingers cherry-picking his words and deleting their context to claim the King was actually one of them. The very sort of people who have been relieved by, if not outright applauding his murder, are now trading on his legacy for their own selfish interests, trying, as the columnist in the Michigan Advance wrote, to make him not only colorblind but raceless, sent not to challenge whites but to forgive them. They ignore the true radicalism of his message, not just the radicalism of active nonviolence, of stubbornly demanding what is right, the power of just stubbornly refusing to back down, the embracing of, as King put it, the fact that peace is not the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. Not just that. But they ignored the radicalism of the program, of the commitments, of the ideas he proposed, the vision he advanced. A vision not only of racial justice, but of economic justice, such that he once said that, quoting, "If we are to achieve a real equality, the U.S. will have to adopt a modified form of socialism," that is, a democratic socialism. We forget that the last major campaign of his life was the Poor People's March. The reason he was in Memphis was to support a sanitation workers' strike, and in the speech he gave the night before his murder, he urged his black audience to take their money out of white banks and put it in black ones. So I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear a single damn right-winger saying "let freedom ring" or anything at all about a dream, claiming to honor and the term is particularly apt here, claiming to honor the whitewashed version of Martin Luther King, while by their actions they spit on his memory every other day of the year. They do not have the moral standing to invoke his name or anything about them, and it's a profound outrage when they do. That's it for this week. We will be back in 2 weeks. More news, more views, all the rest of that. In the meantime, you, as always, have the best 2 weeks you possibly can. Stay safe, wear the damn mask, and as always, peace.